Hello and welcome to this presentation on the Cerebral Debugger. What we can see here is the traditional to-dos MVC application running with Cerebral. So what we're going to do is jump into the Chrome developer tool and the Cerebral extension. Okay, so let's just go through this step by step. What we see here is that a signal has been triggered, and that's because we're using the Cerebral router. And that triggers a signal when the application fires up, checking the URL and triggering the correct signal to put the application in the correct state. So what we see here is one signal has been triggered and we have two links next to it. The reset link just resets the state of your application. So if I go in here and make some changes and I hit reset, we can see that it went back to its initial state. If I click the model link, we can take a look inside the state tree. So this is all the state of your application, and you can just click through it and browse around in it. We also have a checkbox that allows us to track signals. You don't have to do that, so that you only see the last signal. And when you refresh the application, it will always start at its initial state. But if this checkbox is checked, it will track the signals as you do changes in the UI, and that allows you to do time travel debugging. And when you refresh the application, it will replay the signals so that the application goes straight back to the state you left it in when you refresh the page. So what we're going to do now is trigger a couple of signals. And what you see here now is that we have this slider available to us. So if I drag this slider, you see that the UI updates and the application goes into the state based on the slider here. And we can also get information about the signals that has been triggered. And in this case, it's a new to-do title changed signal. And this signal is synchronous, and the reason this is synchronous is because it's an input. So when you do changes to an input, you want the value of the input to synchronously be set into your application state store and then be moved right back to the input. By default, Cerebral will run these signals between animation frames. And that can be a problem with inputs because it can cause a flicker and just unwanted behavior. So you have the possibility to specifically say that, okay, this signal should run synchronously. So when the signal executes, it will run one action, as we can see here, called set new to-do title. And this action will receive an input, which has the title HE. And it does a mutation to the state store on the new to-do title state and just puts in the string there. Now, if we click this state, we can also see that it's correct inside the state store. And even if we click this model, we can go in here and we can find new to-do title and it states HE. So that's really nice. Now, what you might notice is when I went back here to this first signal, we can see that we also have this 1 millisecond, and it just gives an indication of how much time it took to trigger the signal and do the update in the UI. And now the reason this was not indicated here is because it was 0 milliseconds. So if you start to spend some time on running signals, it will indicate that. And you should ideally run these signals below 16 milliseconds. But again, it's not like it's an indication, but it's not perfect. So do not like be a slave of it. It's just there to give you some indication. Okay. So what we're going to do now is trigger a different signal. I'll hit enter here. And now we trigger a more complex signal. As we can see, there are multiple actions, and we also see that this add to do action does not only get an input, but it actually creates an output also. And that output will be available to all the other actions after it. As you can see, here we have it, the next action and the next action. What we also see here is that milliseconds indication down here is available on the set counters action. And that is because when this signal triggers, all these actions run synchronously. But after the set counters action, there's an asynchronous action. So what Cerebral does then is indicate how much time it took to run all these actions and update the UI. And then, of course, it does update the UI, and then it runs the asynchronous actions. And in this case, it's just one action called save to do. And it does some async stuff and then gives an output. And in this case, we can see that it did a success output. It could also do an error, but as we can see here, it was a success. And then it outputted an ID and ran an action called update to do. And this took 2 milliseconds to run this stuff. And after it's done, it notifies the view layer that it should update itself. And it also did state mutations, as we can see here. And I can also, again here, click to-dos 0 here, and we can see the to-do being added inside our state store. Okay, so what I also want to show you is that even though we run asynchronous code, we can still remember state. So it doesn't matter if it's run synchronously or asynchronously. So that's really nice. Now, what I want to show you now is when I refresh the application, it will reproduce the state. And this is really powerful when you do development, because you don't have to reproduce the state all the time. But if I uncheck this checkbox and I do a refresh, it will start from the beginning again. Okay, so this is basically what the debugger does. It just gives you really great insight into what's happening inside your application. And you can see that while you're playing around with the UI. So you kind of like get the user perspective and the developer perspective at the same time. And that's a really powerful concept. So I hope you enjoy the debugger and have fun.